Welcome to Desk Geek. Now we are going to discuss something that's certainly going to aggravate one of you, some of you. If you're an Android fanboy or an Apple fanboy, then this is probably going to hurt your feelings at the end of the day. I'm also going to tell you that this is going to be, at least one of your feelings are going to be hurt. This is going to be a long video. This is not going to be a short video. So if you're one of those people that have the attention span of only 5 minutes, I've had a couple people comment like, "This is 2017. Your video shouldn't be over 5 minutes, loser. Use some editing software." You're probably not for this community, and you can get the frack out, or you can skip to the end like most people, and you can just see the conclusion. But this is for discussion. I want discussion. I want the community to be involved, and I want to explain why I came up with some of the ratings that I did, and it's important that I do that. So that's why this video is going to be a little longer in length. The last thing I'll mention is I'm going to be doing a 30-day, at least 30-day challenge for Linux. So you'll notice everything's changed. The video will probably sound a little different because I'm still getting set up in a complete Linux solution. So I wanted to do that to show you not only how you can completely replace Windows or Mac, whatever you're using, with Linux and utilize the software packages that are all free out there for Linux. So that's why some of this looks different, and you see a very basic Ubuntu here with nothing added on, because that 30-day challenge, I'm going to be doing videos to show you how to set things up and customize it for you. So I apologize if the audio or video and things are off. You also notice I don't have my background anymore because I don't have the software installed on Linux or anything to do that. So this video though, what is it for? Who is the most secure, Android or Apple? So this isn't saying who has the best phone, what's the best phone for you, none of that. This isn't to say that either one is better than the other. This is focusing on a very specific area of security and the overall business models of Apple versus Google, and determining based on that which one is a more secure platform. So you see my beautiful art here is actually prettier. I had arms and everything coming out, but when I switched to Ubuntu and opened it online, it completely changed it. I mean, it really wasn't that much better, let's be honest, but it was a little bit. But anyways, that's my little graphic I did for you guys. Definitely spent months and months and months on that. So what are we going to rate these companies on? So we've got business model, government requests, EFF, privacy ratings, exploits and vulnerabilities, privacy and policy, and encryption, permission systems. Oh, I don't want you to see the results yet. And of course, the results. Under each section, I rated and told you why. So we're going to start with business model. I think the business model is important to understand the company that you have, that you're providing your information to. Google obviously's business model is heavily weighted on ads, ad-based services. They give you those free, and if nothing else you get out of this video, understand nothing is free. But they give you the so-called free access into Gmail. You know, that was the big thing for them when you saw that counter every time you logged into Gmail, giving you more and more space, which was very unique compared to its competitors at the time. You get their search engine, you get their docs, you get everything that they provide in a free like manner. Of course, that free, you are exchanging something for that, because nothing's really free. Google is not some great company that just makes money out of nowhere and doesn't charge anybody for anything. They make money off ads. That's their primary income. So they do have some hardware and things out there and products that they sell, but for the most part, they're an ad-based cloud business. As such, their goal is to collect as much information on you as possible so that they can personalize ads to you. Those personal ads, as they get more and more information on you, can be more and more effective for the folks who are selling products to make sure that they can get you to purchase them. So the more information they know about you, the better. If you have medical conditions, if you're married, if your wife just got pregnant because you're Google searching pregnancy, that's the type of stuff that they're focused on. I do want to mention too that Google obviously has had hit and miss stances on security. Eric Schmidt, a former CEO, was quoted saying, if you have something you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. I don't want people to know the moment my wife gets pregnant. I don't want them to know about private conversations with my wife. I don't want them to know what I email my wife. And that information to me is private. It's not something I want them scouring through to say, hey, you know what you need? You need this, pregnancy test and things like that, or you need this rash cream. I mean, that's the type of stuff that's very private. Your best friends and stuff probably don't know that. And that's the reason why, as far as a business model, Apple gets 5 and Google gets 3, because Apple stores most of its data locally on its devices to improve the experience. It does do some data grabbing, such through products like Siri, but it's not solely based on that business model. They sell high luxury end products. They charge a premium for them. You can say it's worth it or it's not. That's not what the argument is, but they're more product centric than Google, and therefore don't rely on that aggregation of cloud-based data like Google does to personalize things to you. And now you can say, I don't care if Google knows everything about me, but you got to remember that applies to all of its affiliates and everybody it does business with, and government requests, etc., which falls into our next section of government requests. Now, interestingly here, you'll notice that Apple only got 3 stars and Google got 4, and that's based on research that I did that showed in the calendar year Apple received 1,986 U.S. account requests for data, meaning the government came to them and said, hey, we want you to take something down, or we need information on somebody, and 82% of those requests, Apple gave some information to them on. Apple does require them to have legitimate sources to, like subpoenas and things to acquire that data. But 82%, that's very, very high. Compared to Google, had 81,000 requests, but only 64% where data was provided. Now, there's some issues here because you're talking 61 or 81,000 versus 1,900 requests, but you also have to balance that out with the fact that Google has many more products where subpoena and things would be more important for a government to get a hold of, like Gmail and your email accounts, your text messages, all of that. Whereas Apple doesn't have all of those cloud-based services, and there are far more Android users than there are iPhone users. So at the end of the day, I gave Google 1 more star here because they at least gave less information overall than Apple in these requests. The next section, and the one I think you should rate the most heavily in your decision, is EFF privacy rating. EFF is the Electronic Foundation Frontier. Frontier Foundation, got that backwards. And they do amazing work protecting individuals like you and me, our privacy rights, when these big gigantic companies come down like the music industry and start suing college students who have no money and everything else and threatening them. These guys come in to help and provide legal counsel and even representation for absolutely free to help these individuals. So they're a really fantastic organization. Definitely recommend you back them, and they do a lot to protect internet freedom. And as such, they do ratings every single year on which companies have your back, who protect you the most. And you'll see in 2015, the latest report, Google only has 3 stars and Apple has 5. So they protect you the most. What areas do they protect you in? They follow industry accepted best practices. They tell users about government data requests, so you know the government's asking for information on you, which I think is very important, and you have the right to know. Discloses policies on data retention, discloses governmental content removal requests, and opposes backdoors, which they were very much in the news for with the FBI recently. A lot of controversy, people wanting Apple to create or help the FBI get into a backdoor, but that is a very, very dangerous situation for everybody in our privacy. And thankfully, Apple stood up, and Google and other companies, Facebook, threw in and said, hey, you guys shouldn't be asking us to do this. But Google, on the other hand, they do follow best practices, but they don't tell their users about government data demands, and they're not good at disclosing policies on their data retention. They do disclose government content removal requests, and they do oppose backdoors. What I think is most interesting here is if you go back just to 2014, you'll notice that both Apple and Google are at 5 stars here. So between 2014 and 2015, the EFF has taken away Google's security stars here for these two areas, and Apple has maintained it. And I think that's a very important thing to take into consideration, that Apple has been good and continued to maintain the level of having your back and keeping your information safe, whereas Google's starting to dwindle in that area, at least according to the EFF. And we'll see with this next year's report if that changes. Because of that, Apple gets 5 stars here and Google only gets 3, which is the exact rating the EFF gave them. Exploits and vulnerabilities, both companies have their fair share of exploits. Apple gets 1 additional star due to the fact that their updating and patching system is far superior. Now, this can be controversial because Android allows many manufacturers to build products for them, and Apple only builds their own. So, by nature of having their own closed-in garden, they're obviously going to have a better um, adoption rate when it comes to new patches and updates, whereas Android, it kind of leaves it up to the manufacturers whether they can release it, what kind of issues it's going to cause, etc. Hopefully, as Google takes more control of the manufacturers and forces them, we'll continue to see that individuals on Android are migrating to the latest version, which is creating patches for loopholes and exploits that are out there in the code that is found. So while they do release those patches, not all manufacturers are forced to move to them. And because of that, you have Android users out there unknowingly with older versions of software that leave them open to exploits that could get private information off of their devices. Both of them have had definitely their fair share of vulnerabilities and issues. In 2016, there was 161 vulnerabilities for iOS. Android had 460. So that's why they get 1 extra star here with all of that combined than Google. But certainly there's more room for improvement in both. Privacy policy. So both of these privacy policies of the companies leave a lot to be desired. Apple has a nice GUI talking about how they want to protect you and everything else. But when it gets down to the actual wording of their policies that probably most of you don't read, there's a lot of gray areas there. There's a lot of room for interpretation. The lawyers have done a fantastic job being lawyers. And Google is the same way, although they don't have all the fantastic, presentation on here's how we protect you and all the stuff that Apple has. The verbiage is very, very similar. It's almost impossible to really tell the difference between the two. Apple collects less data based on their product portfolio, and it's hard to get an affirmative answer though on how long they store information on. So the only thing I could utilize in this that I combined with kind of data retention here with the privacy policy was Siri. And so we know Siri, for instance, stores 6 months before removing the personal information, and then they keep it as long as 2 years, whereas Google has a forever retention policy. So they keep your information forever, but apparently after 2 years or something, or 6 years, I think it is, Google goes in and starts removing some of your personal information that's tied to it. So because of this, really, Apple kind of has an advantage. But all in all, when you combine those two factors, they're really kind of a tie. And I say that because I think Apple could do a lot here to really break away from Google on their data retention policy, as well as improving their privacy policy and discussing more of their products and what they're collecting. Google was a little more upfront with here's all of our products and here's what they're collecting. So I felt that was a little more clear, even though they're collecting a lot more data and the retention policy sucks. They're at least telling you all about it and what they have. Whereas Apple, it was very difficult to find where they're collecting information and where they're not. Encryption. Apple has had default encryption since iOS 8, and Android has just enabled it on OS Nougat, which is their latest operating system. Previously, Android's been in the news saying that they're going to have encryption and force encryption, and they've had encryption on their own devices, but a lot of the other manufacturers were not forced to put encryption on by default. So you could still do encryption through apps and other things, but you didn't have it by default, and that created a huge issue where your data basically was susceptible because it wasn't encrypted to any exploits or hacks out there. Whereas since iOS 8, we're iOS 10 now, they've had encryption enabled by default. Permission system, Apple definitely reigns supreme here. The apps are more controlled in the Apple Store by very nature of how Apple handles their apps and their permissions. Apple will ask you throughout the life of the app, not just at the beginning, what permissions the app should have access to. So just because you said, yes, this app can have access to my camera, if it tries to access it again, it will ask you, do you want to have this app within a certain period of time, an expiration time? Do you want this app to still have, access to this camera? Additionally, and the most important factor here is on Apple, I can tell it, when I install it, I don't want it to have access into my camera and things and still utilize the app. I may not be able to turn on the camera inside the app or whatever it's wanting access to there, but I can still utilize the core app and deny it those permissions. Whereas on Android, you either give it those permissions or it's most likely not going to work at all. So at the end of the day, Apple gets 28 out of 35 stars, of the potential 35 stars, a very good score. And Android gets 22 out of 35. Now, I know this is going to be controversial. You may have additional information where you're like, hey, I know Android's better and here's why. And I'd love to hear that in the comments below. This is my opinion based on information that I gathered and researched and how I feel Apple and Android compete with each other. But you may have better information, inside sources, different opinions, and that's okay. That's what this community is about. So leave those below. Let me know what you think. Until next time, get out there and fill your brains.
Don't get this far. Does that like the baby?